least a half hour.
Camera is running. All right. Good morning. My name is Mark Straley. Today is the 29th of October, 2024. I'm with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Share Your Story project. Bellevue University is a sponsor of the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Memorial Park Project. And I'm currently in Juanita, Nebraska at the American Legion Post 304 with veteran Edward Arenz, who has agreed to share his story for the Library of Congress Veteran History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Veteran Memorial Project. We're going to begin with your full name, and if you don't mind, we'd like you to spell your last name for us.
Okay, Edward Nicholas Arenz, A-R-E-N-Z.
And when were you born, sir?
November 11th, 1948.
And you were born into a family. What were your parents' occupations?
My dad was a farmer. My mother was a hairdresser, but she just worked out of her home.
Outstanding.
And we lived north of Juanita here, probably 18 miles.
And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister and a younger sister.
And their names are?
Ann and Jerry.
Outstanding. Did you go to school here in Juanita?
I went to country school through the 6th grade, to the middle of the 6th grade, and I came to town in the middle of the 6th grade. My mother died in 1958 when I was just ready to turn 10, and my dad remarried in 1960, and in 1960 we moved to town. My stepmother and her 3 children lived in town, and so that's when I came to town school.
Outstanding. And did you graduate high school here?
Yes, from Juanita High.
How many were in your graduating class?
30, we originally had 36. I think 34 graduated.
Outstanding. Now, you told me earlier that you were married before entering military service. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, my wife and I were high school sweethearts, and we actually had our first date our freshman year in high school. And we got married in 1969 in June, and we got home from our honeymoon, and I had papers to take my physical for the draft, and so that was kind of a bummer to come home from your honeymoon. But anyway, then I took my physical, and in December of 1969 I was drafted. They had started the lottery system then, but I don't even know what my number was because I was drafted before the lottery took effect in later that year, or end of that year of 69. So I was drafted, and my wife finished school. She was in college, and she finished school, and we had moved from Juanita to Kearney that summer, and she finished school, and she worked in the Kearney High School library. She was a librarian.
And if you could, please tell us a little about how your family and your wife felt about you being drafted.
My dad was a veteran. He was in the Navy. He was a CB in the Navy in World War II, and he felt I should serve my country, and I wasn't pleased to be drafted, but I wasn't regretting it at all. I wanted to serve my country too, and my wife just knew that she would miss me a lot. And,
Sure.
Of course, she had her life going with her schooling and her teaching, so we got through it.
I think it's wonderful that even with the draft on, which means it really wasn't your choice, you still chose to go and serve honorably. And I feel like that's a debt that we owe veterans who were indeed drafted and went not subject to their own decision, but mindfully and dutifully and loyally providing service to the country when called upon. I think that's a strength. So thank you.
I think Juanita, we're a small town, small rural community, and I think most people around here feel that way because I don't know of anybody that were what you say, draft dodgers from our community that I know of anyway.
Right.
Everybody felt required and honored to serve. In the end, I was honored to serve.
Well, that's wonderful. Tell us a little bit about how you made your journey from the physical exam to getting to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay, I took my physical that summer, shortly after our honeymoon, and then
You went to Denver?
I went to Denver. Yes, I went to Denver. I got my papers all out of Denver, because our Chase County is associated with the Denver area for selective service. Anyway, I can't remember. I think I either got on a train or a bus from either Juanita or possibly McCook, and went to Omaha, and there, I'm not sure, I guess I was bused down to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and started, I went in the 8th or 9th of December, and I was in Leonard Wood during the winter, and it wasn't the most pleasant thing, but made it through basic. One of the bivouacs we had to go on, it was a 2-day overnight bivouac and it was snowy and cold, and the day before we left, I came down with pneumonia, and I got put in the hospital at Leonard Wood. So I actually got to miss that bivouac that time, and I still got through basic. So
good on you.
But it was good in basic. We it's all your personal, individual training. So
Now, I haven't interviewed anyone from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, but I assume at that time you went through World War II style open bay barracks?
yes.
And
Yes, that's barracks like that, and we used M1s, and yes, it was pretty much still World War II style.
And were there any instructors specifically that stand out in your mind from that basic experience?
Yes, there was a man, he was out of Texas. His name was Crockett. Our two main drill sergeants in our unit, in our platoon, were Drill Sergeant Crockett and Drill Sergeant Cross. Cross was a white man, Crockett was a black man, and they both were drill sergeants. They were on you, and but I respected them both. I was older. I was 21 when I went in, and there were so many young guys that didn't have a clue. But I was a little more mature, I guess, and I was married, and I did what I had to do, and I knew that that's what they were there for. And I know one morning we had reveille and we had to call out, and we always ran out of the barracks in formation to get inspected every morning. And one morning I didn't get myself up in time to shave, and I think it was Drill Sergeant Cross came up to me and said, "You haven't shaved?" And I said, "No, sir, I haven't." And of course they were just sergeants, but you called them sir. Or I can't remember if we still called them sir or not. But anyway, he took me into the barracks, into the bathroom, and I dry shaved with a straight razor. And I did it and went back out and got through it. So that was one thing I remember. I only pulled KP once in basic, and I don't know why all that was. I just right place at the right time, I guess.
Well, I'm going to backtrack for a moment.
Okay.
You mentioned you were 21 when you went in, so you had graduated from high school a while before. I'm sure you had some kind of employment between.
Yes.
What did you do then?
When my wife and I got married here in Juanita, we got married in Hamlet, 8 miles down the road from here. My wife was from Hamlet, a little town of about 50 people. Anyway, we lived here that summer. I worked for my dad on the farm, and then we moved to Kearney in September of '69. My wife was finishing school. She was going to Kearney State College. And we moved down there, rented a house, and I got a job at a hardware store, a coast-to-coast hardware store. And I worked there till I had to go to the service.
Do you feel that experience and that additional rounding before you went on active duty contributed to your service? Did that make you not necessarily better, but more experienced than the other younger guys?
A little more mature, yes. A little more experienced, a little more mature. I felt I was more mature than so many of the young kids in there. And I did get my job back with the same employer after I got out.
Nice.
So I was very fortunate. But no, I think so. You know, being married and just being older, a little more mature, I think helped.
Now, I believe Fort Leonard Wood at that time was a one-station unit training place. Did you go on to do your advanced training at Fort Leonard Wood?
No,
Okay. Where did you do
from
that?
Leonard Wood, we were bused down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And I took AIT down there, advanced training down there. It's an artillery base.
Right.
And I was put into artillery then. I went through AIT down in Fort Leonard Wood. And then at the end of AIT, I think there was 36 or 7 of us out of our AIT company or battalion that were chosen to stay at Fort Sill for I came out of there as an artillery mechanic, and we were selected to stay for another 6 weeks, I think it was, for advanced mechanic schooling. And during that 6 weeks, the ones of us that were married, which was a few of us in that group of 36, got to have our wives come down then, and my wife and I lived off post, and so it was a good time then. But we did get out of there as E3s then.
Okay.
And so I went to our preliminary orders out of that second 6-week class. Our preliminary orders about 2 weeks before we got done, our whole class was going to go to Germany. Mm-hmm. We all got excited. Our wives were going to get to go to Germany with us and stuff. This was in 1970. And so we were excited to get to go to Germany. Then 2 days before we graduated, our final orders come down and our whole class went to Vietnam.
The entire class.
We were pretty bummed about that. But anyway, our wives were very upset. But anyway, we all went to Vietnam, and I think I made contact with one of those 36 guys in Vietnam one time is all. So we just pretty much lost track of each other.
So tell us about deploying then from Fort Sill across the ocean to Vietnam.
Okay, I did get a week's leave before I went to Nam. And I got to come home. My wife and I could come home back here to Juanita. And during that time, my parents were going to my dad had an uncle in Las Vegas that was, he and his wife were having their 50th anniversaries, and they were going to that. So it just happened that we were home on leave then. So my wife and I got to ride to Las Vegas with my folks, and we spent a couple days in Vegas, which was nice. Then I got on the train from here then again and went to Omaha again on the train, I believe. And I guess I flew out of Omaha to West Coast to Fort Lewis, Washington. And I went from Fort Lewis through Japan and down to Vietnam. So.
Outstanding. Do you know where you arrived in Vietnam?
Yes, Cam Bay.
Okay.
I think most incoming people, most incoming servicemen landed in Cam Bay, from what I heard. And of course, you get there in the middle of the night, and you step off the plane, and just the smell of the different place that you're at was it just took me back. I had no idea what I was, expecting, and no idea what I was running into, hitting. But we got there in the middle of the night, and the first thing they gave us was our toothbrush and said, go brush your teeth, and then we didn't get to sleep till about 4 in the morning then, so. And
you arrived under the impression that you were going to be a field artillery mechanic.
Yes, that was my MOS going into Nam, and that's what I assumed I would be.
But personnel had other...
Well, the next morning, we assembled. There was about 200 of us from that flight. Our whole flight assembled in an outside bleachers, and they started giving orders for different people, and real shortly they said, has anybody here had any college accounting? And I and another guy raised our hands, because I had had some college accounting, bookkeeping. And they said, okay, you both are clerks. And that was it. I became a clerk the next morning after I got in Vietnam, and I had no idea what that meant, but I had had some college accounting, so that's where I was put. And I was at Cam Bay, I think another day, and then sent over to Cu Chi. And at Cu Chi I was processed, and I was hooked with the, no, I'm just blank. Unit that was based in Cu Chi out of Hawaii.
U.S. Army Pacific Command? U.S. Army Pacific Command?
No, that was where I separated out of.
Okay. I'm trying.
I'm just blank now. The Tropic Lightning.
Okay.
Tropic Lightning was their motto. And they were based out of Hawaii. So I was assigned to them and went to Dao Tien, which was kind of between Cu Chi and Cambodia. Okay. And when I got there, I was assigned to a battalion unit, and I became a battalion clerk for the whole battalion.
And can you tell us what kind of battalion? Was that an infantry battalion?
No, this artillery battalion.
An artillery battalion.
Artillery battalion. Infantry would have been a company, but artillery would be a battalion.
Very good.
So I was with an artillery battalion. I was with artillery the whole time I was in Vietnam, but I was never a mechanic.
Okay.
But I was assigned as a clerk, and I became a battalion clerk. So I was in the rear area. So-called rear area, the whole time I was there until the Tropic Lightning stood down and went back to Hawaii. I was there from July till, it must have been December or January. I got, our unit went back to Hawaii, stood down and left Vietnam, and I was reassigned to 2nd Field Forces, and it was at Benoit, just outside of Saigon, at Benoit Air Base, and I was there the rest of the time. And this, what you had just mentioned,
the user pack.
Yeah, that was just when I got out, I guess. So, but I was with Second Field Forces there the rest of the time at Benoit, Benoit, or Long Binh Air Base by Saigon, and I was still a clerk. So what I did as a battalion clerk, I did sundries funds, which was sundries was the beer and the soda and all the stuff for the officers club and for the non-commissioned club, the enlisted men's club. I handled all the purchasing of and supplying of stuff for those clubs, and as men were transferred in and out of our battalion, I processed their paperwork in and out, and pretty much that's what I did most of the time I was over there.
So mostly personnel functions, but these sundry things and other
Right.
activities were additional duties? But they were significant enough you did it a lot of the time?
I did a lot, probably as much of that as I did personnel. And then when Tropic Lightning stood down, I went to Second Field Forces at Long Binh, and I got assigned to a battalion, straight battalion, not a headquarters battalion, just a straight like a company. Mm-hmm. And I was just a battalion clerk, like a company clerk. And I was there, a clerk just for a battalion the rest of the time I was there. But we were still in the rear area. We were just outside of Saigon.
Now, you say in the rear, but the first place you said was up closer to the Cambodian border.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what a day looked like in that first assignment?
Well, you know, it was a rear area, but it was a base camp, basically, and we had artillery trucks and howitzers, artillery equipment, moving in and out from their fire bases to our base camp, and now maybe to another fire base, pretty constantly. And you know, I was inside most of the time in this office, so-called office, and so I didn't get to see a lot of the activity. It was called a rear area, but everybody that was based there did guard duty, and you know, you'd had claymore mines out from your guard bunkers out by the wire, out by the perimeter of your base there, and you know, so we would have mines go off once in a while. We'd have enemy getting close enough that mines would go off, and for about 3 months there, during that time, we would have incoming rockets almost daily, and you could just about figure around 5 o'clock in the evening you were going to start getting incoming rockets. And we lost some equipment. I don't remember that we lost any men, that we had any fatalities the time I was there, but we did lose some equipment from rockets coming in. But almost every afternoon for about 3 months there, we were getting incoming rockets, and some of them whistled, and sometimes you couldn't hear them. But you know, and whenever there was a siren for rockets, everybody ran to the bunkers. We slept in bunkers below the ground. There were sandbags above the ground a little bit, but we were down below ground level. So that's where we slept all the time, which wasn't. We didn't want to be in our bunkers where we slept very often just to sleep, because it was kind of underground, and it was usually a number of rats. Mm-hmm. I remember different nights, you know, you'd have to sleep just laying flat on your cot with your hands on your lap, because if you let your hand dangle over the side of your cot, a rat might come up and nibble on it. But I remember one night there was 8 of us in our bunker, and they were mostly guys I worked with in the office, and we decided to stay up all night, take turns staying up all night and set. We had big rat traps, regular rat traps. Stay up all night and catch rats. So one guy would stay up, and then we'd take shifts, and we ended up with 12 rats the next morning in rat traps. We lined them up on our bunkers.
Now, just for our anybody who watches this later, for their understanding, can you show us how big these rats were?
Well, they were, I'm guessing they were 8 to 10 inches long, or longer. Some of them were a little bigger, but
so they weren't
mice.
rats like we think of. They're bigger rats.
Yeah, they were pretty good sized rats. I'm guessing the smallest ones are 6 to 8 inches.
Okay.
That's body, not tail.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, they were rats. I've got pictures of the night we caught them all and laid out in our bunkers the next morning. So, but anyway, that's just the way you lived, and you got used to it, and you had incoming rockets every night, and you just expected it.
But the perimeter of your base camp was relatively secure. You weren't too worried about penetrations?
Not too much, as long as everybody manned their guard spots each night. We had a number of guard spots throughout or around their perimeter, and they were manned with 3 guys in every bunker every night, and everybody took their turn, and you go out before it got dark and go out beyond your bunker and set up your claymore mines out beyond you, and then go back and stay in your bunker. But I only remember a couple times that mines went off. People were trying to penetrate in.
Okay.
So we were pretty secure at that base camp.
And then later you moved back down by Saigon with the other command.
Long Binh Air Base, yes.
And can you tell us about that as opposed to what you just did?
It was a lot more secure. It was Long Binh Air Base. It was one of the United States major bases over there, and it was very secure. After the war and looking back and reading about the history of some of this stuff, you don't know how secure you ever were, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But Long Binh was very secure. So.
And were your sleeping arrangements better?
Yes.
And
yes.
Tell us about those.
We had huts, and they were more like similar to basic training huts. Yeah. They were, in fact, when I became a company or a battalion clerk then, just for the battalion commander, I had my own room in the building that his office was in, and my office. So that kind of became nice. So.
And was that a reinforced building? It wasn't likely to have a mortar come through the roof?
Oh, I'm sure a mortar could come through the roof, but it was a stronger building.
Okay.
Yes. Going back to when I was in the first unit out of Dao Tien there, when we had our rear base there at Dao Tien, and we were supplying all the fire bases, the closest thing I guess I ever got to feeling fear from the enemy, the rockets come in every night, and the perimeter and stuff, you always were cautious about that. But the scaredest I think I ever was periodically, as the sundries clerk, I would have to find myself a ride from Dao Tien down to Cu Chi, which was our unit headquarters. And there was I think it was a Chase Manhattan Bank branch there, and I had to do funds I had to go to the bank and do stuff for the sundry funds there, but I'd always have to catch my own ride. And I'd usually, a chopper going this way or that way, I could usually catch a ride on a chopper. And one time, a little Huey chopper, just a little Bubble four-seater chopper, was going down. Well, I think that's when I was coming back from Cu Chi back to Dao Tien. And you just wait out at the chopper pad and see if you can catch a ride. And the pilot come over and he said, "You need a ride?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to Dow Tien." And he said, "I've got a spot for you." So I got in and I sat beside the pilot on one of the first two seats, and then an MP and a prisoner of war with a sandbag over his head came and sat behind us. And of course, no doors, open sides, and the prisoner was right behind me. And that whole trip, it was about 45-minute flight, I just sat there on edge, knowing somehow that prisoner was going to get his hands free and grab me and throw me out of the helicopter. That was the only thing I was probably closest to being, having contact with the enemy.
Well, it's almost as if you anticipated my next question. I'm going to ask 3 of 4 parts because that's an amazing story you just shared. Did you have any especially interesting story related to a sorrowful or a funny, humorous, or otherwise interesting event besides this helicopter flight?
Oh,
something that was maybe sad or something that was super funny.
In the rear areas. Oh, one thing, a guy from Juanita here, a good friend of mine, I think you're interviewing him today, his name is Jack Fanning. Mm-hmm. He was in Vietnam while I was. And we were very close friends, he and his wife, and me and my wife. He was married when he went in too. I did get to catch up with him in Vietnam. He was there, he got there a few months before me, but while we were there together, we met up in Cu Chi and got to spend an afternoon together.
Nice.
So that was kind of fun. I knew he was there, and we tried to make contact. He was a grunt. He was a rifle soldier in the Army, and but I did get to meet up with him, which made it for a nice day once. But other than that, being in the rear areas, especially the second one down at Long Bend Air Base, when I was with 2nd Field Forces, you were far enough away from the actual activity of the fighting and stuff that, things got pretty lax. And even, when I was at Dow Tien, the guys drink beer a lot, but the drug problem didn't get bad. I didn't see until the next place. But at the second place down when I was in 2nd Field Forces, I saw a number of people in our unit were getting on drugs, on heroin. Heroin was very strong there. And I had one good friend. In fact, he was my company commander, my battalion commander's driver, and he and I became friends. He was a black man from New York City, and we had nothing in common, but we became friends. And he was kind of a crazy guy. And one time he took the company commander's Jeep and drove it to Saigon and drove it in the Saigon River and left it. And he was disciplined for that, but he got through it. So, but he did get on heroin pretty heavily, and we heard he left country before I did, and we heard, and we think it was accurate, that he at that time in the early 70s, if you had to take a drug test before you left Vietnam, and if you had any kind of drug residue in you couldn't leave until you were done off of it. Anyway, he I don't know how he passed his urine test, his drug test, but he passed, and we heard that he shot himself up with heroin before he got on the plane, so he'd have a good high. It was a 22-hour flight back home, and we heard he died on the plane. He overdosed, so it was a tough, sad thing. But the drug problem got pretty tough over there during that latter part of the time I was there. Everybody probably tried it some. I did. But I wanted to come home, so I didn't.
I'm glad you shared that with us, though, because the reality of war and deployment is that it's a human endeavor. And while we have great virtues and amazing stories of courage, we also have other vices and things that we need to pay attention to because of the stress of warfare, the changes of things that are going on, the isolation and remoteness of our duty and responsibilities. Can you tell us a little bit about maintaining contact with your wife during your deployment?
I did excellent the first few months I was there, and even with my dad. My dad, when he was in the Navy, he wrote his mother every week. And I started out writing my in-laws and my parents and my sister and my sisters and my wife very well. And as time went on, I got away from that. And the latter part of my tour over there, I got pretty lax in keeping in touch with everybody. Pretty much I kept in touch with my wife, and that's about it. Just get involved with everything that's going on,
and post-mail was the primary. You didn't have any other real resources, did you?
No.
Right. So for those who don't understand that, there wasn't any email, there wasn't any texting, there wasn't maybe a remote phone call once.
I did make a phone call to my wife once. I had to go into the electronics room, and it was on a two-way radio, and I'd have to say, "Hi, dear," over. And she'd have to say over, and I'd have to say, "I love you," over. And I had one phone call that wasn't the best, but we got to talk to each other.
So if I remember right, that was Mars network phone calling?
I think so.
And that was empowered by amateur radio volunteers, so they could bounce a signal all the way around the world.
Right.
Okay.
Barry Goldwater.
So.
I'm sorry?
Barry Goldwater
Barry Goldwater.
did that.
Okay.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
I think that's right. It was Mars.
Very nice. Well, as all good things must, your tour came to an end. So share with us how you recovered and went back to the United States.
We flew out of Saigon. At that time, everybody had to be bust of Saigon, and we flew out of there. And I made sure I had all my gear with me and everything ready. I wanted to get out of country. I did extend in country. I think it was only like 4 or 5 days. I extended my tour in country 5 days or 4 days. So when I got out of country and back to the United States, I was out of the Army. I got an early release because of my extension.
Okay.
Some guys had to extend several months, but I had to extend 4 or 5 days.
Well, that's an easy call, right?
Yeah, it was. And when I got out then, I was out of the Army because I went in the Army in December of '69 and I got out of the Army of July of '71.
Okay.
So I wasn't even in the Army 2 years. So I got out. I flew back through Japan again the same way and landed instead of Fort Lewis, Washington, I landed in California. I think it probably tells me somewhere.
Probably Clark.
Oakland, California.
Okay.
Oakland. And I was processed out there. And then I can't remember if they flew me on to Omaha or if I had to fly myself to Omaha then. But I had my uniform, I had my dress uniform on, and so I was able to get military rates, whatever, anyway. And so I flew from Oakland to Omaha, and my wife met me there, and we lived in Kearney then. So came back to Kearney and got my same job back at the hardware store, and my wife was still at the media center at the high school in Kearney, and so we stayed there till that was in '71, and we moved back here to Juanita in '76. So I started farming with my dad, and we've been here ever since.
Nice. Nice. When you were making those travels from Oakland to Omaha and then back here, Did you have any interactions with people that were good, bad, or non-memorable?
Not really any memorable things. No, I had my dress uniform on coming home, and I don't really remember that I had any interactions. Nobody disrespected me or respected me, I guess. If they did, wasn't paying attention.
Wasn't important enough to register.
One thing I will mention, in basic training, I went in, like I say, the 8th of December in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and my and my roommate were both older. We were in our early 20s, and we were platoon leaders. He was a platoon leader and I was assistant platoon leader, and because of that, we got to wear little bands over our deal with sergeant stripes on them. I was like an E5 and he was an E6, stripes that we slid up over our sleeves. Anyway, at basic, we got to have a Christmas leave. We'd only been there like 2 weeks and we got to have a Christmas leave. And so I flew from Leonard Wood, and they flew me to Omaha, and again my wife picked me up and we came home. We drove home from Kearney then to Juanita here to be home with both our families at Christmas. And I had my uniform on. And I was going through, I think it was Cambridge, Nebraska, east of McCook, and speeding apparently. And I got stopped by the city cop, and he came over to me and he says, "Oh, Sergeant, I'm sorry, I didn't see you were a sergeant." He says, "My son's in the service too." He says, "You can go on."
Nice.
I was a fake sergeant, but he sent me on, so that was kind of a funny thing.
I'm glad you didn't correct him.
No, I didn't correct him. But anyway, no, I came home and got my job back, and then we moved back here in '76 to Juanita, and I had a feed yard here in Juanita. I commercially fed cattle for about 12 years, and I've driven truck for 20-some years, and now I'm retired, and I drive for our local rest home.
Nice.
So,
well, if you could take a moment, just think and share with us what you can about how military service and or wartime service in a combat zone changed your outlook on life.
I think I matured a lot. I was 21, but I still think I matured a lot. I learned more responsibility, I think. I was pretty flaky when we got married. I was 20 when we got married, and my wife was 21, but all I'd done was gone to college and work a little, but I think I did grow up, and I really had respect for anybody serving in the service. I felt honored in the end. I felt honored that I was in. I wanted to serve my country. My dad did, my father-in-law did, my brother-in-law did. I wanted to serve. I didn't want to go to Vietnam, but in the end, I came home, and I knew of people that didn't come home, and a lot of friends of mine from Juanita here were in Vietnam. So we were able to, over the years since then, we've been able to share a lot, and just had that bond of all being in Vietnam together. Some of them are gone now already, but we're all in our mid-70s. But it was a good experience in the end. I don't regret it at all.
I love that you mentioned that you had a number of friends here who went and served and came back, because I was going to ask you about veterans organizations of which you're a member, and if you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
Yes, I'm a member. I'm the adjutant of our local American Legion post, and I am a member of the VFW post, but we're such a small community and a small bunch of, I think we have 23 members in our Legion. And we just don't have regular meetings. Everybody's busy. They're farmers, and we don't take time to have regular meetings. But we meet. We always serve during funerals. We always have color guards and honor guards during funerals for veterans. And we try to stay on top of that really well. And so when we get together for a funeral prior, we usually have an informal meeting type gathering. But we have an active, we have high sales at ball games and money makers, and we usually do we try to send a boy or a girl to Boy State and Girl State every year. We offer it anyway, and we've sent people to. A couple of years ago, we sent one to the State Patrol School, and so we stay active. We try to stay active in the community. We have a yearly parade. It's called Harvest Festival in Juanita. It's a 1-day, 2-day deal, and for just our little town, and we always have a parade, and Legion always leads it. Legion and VFW leads it. So yeah.
You need to go?
You can go ahead and go if you need to. I'll get a ride.
Get home.
Dennis.
I'll take you. I'll take you home.
So.
Well, we're almost finished. So that organization is not just a boys' club. That is a service organization.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's camaraderie and service together with
Yeah.
with other veterans. I think that's amazing. Do you think that has continued, that service orientation, because of your prior service? You have that desire to take care of each other?
I think so. I think that's very strong. We don't have a lot of young guys. The majority of us are Vietnam veterans, and some of us are dying off. And we don't have a lot of young guys. We would love to have more young guys, and we just aren't a big enough community. We don't have enough young guys from Desert Storm and some of the other conflicts. But we do have several sons of Legion that help a lot, and they're very good, and they contribute to our post a lot as far as helping when things need done. But we have a good camaraderie with each other, and we sit and visit about Nam quite a bit, and different ones from our town. One was a truck driver in Vietnam, different things. And but I think it has helped being in the service and having our Legion and VFW. It keeps us tight.
Last question. If you were going to give a message to future generations about military service, war, combat deployments, etc., what message would you leave?
I guess one thing I've always thought, since I've been out of the service, I've seen a lot of young guys. They graduate from high school. They don't know what they want to do. Their parents don't know or don't care what they want to do. They, and they maybe go to school and drop out of school, and they just, they're not sure what they want to do. An 18-year-old kid, you can't expect them to decide what they want to do for their whole life when they're 18. That's a young kid. So I guess I would, I have no problem advising someone, a young person, to, if they're unsure of what they want to do, try the service, try the military. And you grow up a lot, you mature a lot, and you learn a lot. You learn a lot of responsibility, and you know, a lot of the young kids that were in when I was in, I was a little older, I was in my 20s, but some of these young kids, you know, I saw a lot of growth in some of them by the time I got out of Vietnam, you know, that ones I was with for a long time. And I would, you know, if you don't know what you want to do, try the Army, you know, go to the service. You know, and the service these days, I assume, or I understand that, you know, it's so much better, you know, if you want to get into the Navy or Air Force or whatever. I have a nephew. My younger sister's son got an appointment to the Coast Guard Academy. And he spent 22 years in the Coast Guard. He just got out 3 years ago. He's been married and has 2 boys. And now he's a pilot for United out of Chicago. So, you know, it made him what he is. And he was a very good Coast Guard person, and he was on the East Coast and West Coast both, and in different hurricanes and involved in a lot of rescue type stuff. And, you know, it's been wonderful for him. And I've known some other people that, you know, have gone in and just made a career out of it, and it's really been good for them.
When you left the military, you left as a Sergeant E5, right?
Yes, Spec 5, Specialist 5, right.
Okay. And you left with the National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal.
Right.
The Army Commendation Medal was both your end of tour award for Vietnam and your end of service award for time in military.
Right. Mm-hmm. There's one other medal that's never been on here, but I was always kind of proud of it. During basic training, I got my expert medal for rifle.
Outstanding.
So of course, I was a farm boy, so I knew how to shoot.
Outstanding. Well, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Arenz, for serving. I'd like to thank you for your service in Vietnam and take this opportunity to officially welcome you home. On behalf of the Library of Congress Tell Your Story program, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation, and Bellevue University, we appreciate your time and your insight today.
No, I thank you for doing this. I appreciate you guys doing this. When I was told about this, I was excited to do it. I appreciate all your efforts in doing it.
Thank you very much.